Tank leads the way. Bo was lying on the lounge window ledge, looking down into the yard. Tank, Dee's daft dog, was trying to play with the kittens, but they didn't want to play, kept hissing and pawing the air at him. Bo smiled as, with a quizzical look, Tank pawed the air back, almost like he was waving to them. Dee was reading her book. It was about fairies. Dee wasn't sure if she believed in them or not, but she loved to read about the things that they do. She loved that they could fly and make magic. She adored their pretty dresses, but mostly she wanted to see a fairy ring. Pike was in the kitchen looking for milk and cookies. He knew that Dee had made some early that morning, before it got too hot to bake, but he couldn't find where she had hidden them. The two both looked at each other as a crashing sound came from the kitchen, followed by an "Ow!" They laughed. Pike was so silly. Dee always put her new bakes in a tin marked detergent. Pike never thought to look there. "Sounds like he just sent something flying," murmured Bo. Sighing deeply, Dee went through to the kitchen to see what damage he had done. Pike stood holding the handle of a mug. It just fell off," he said. Dee gave him one of her odd looks. "Why don't you just ask Pikey?" she said. "There's always accidents when you come looking for cookies." Pikey looked glum and said, "It's more fun this way." Dee picked up the broken pieces of mug and shooed him out of the room. He went into the lounge and picked up the book that she had been reading. "I know," he called out. "Let's go up to the woods and see if we can find a fairy ring." Dee came rushing through, and the two of them looked at Bo. "Can we, please?" Bo scratched her chin and thought. "We'd be gone overnight," she said, "but I guess that we could. Let's get packing." 10 minutes later they were ready. They each had rucksacks, and Pike carried the tent. "You're a boy and you're the strongest," Bo had said as she had added it to his pack. Pike didn't mind. He loved adventures. Also, he had seen Dee put lots of cookies in her pack. He'd stick close to her. She'd feed him. The three of them set off across the farm to the pasture, and over the small creek and up to the high pasture behind the woods. After what seemed miles of walking, Bo groaned, "Where's Tank? He came out with us. Where's he gone?" They started to call for him, but there was no sign of the dog. Dee's lip trembled. "I hope he's all right." "He'll be fine, Dee," said Pikey, putting his arm around her. "He'll turn up, don't you worry." But Dee did worry. She loved her dog, and whilst he could be big and daft, he was a great guard. On they plodded until at last they reached the edge of the trees. "Best camp here tonight," said Bo. "I don't like to camp in the forest itself. It's scary and spooky in there at night." The others shook their heads in agreement. They were frightened of the forest at night too. Dee was very unhappy. She loved Tank best of all her animals, and she didn't like to think of him lost or lonely in the forest. "Perhaps I could just go in a little way and see if I can find him," she said. Bo stretched out her arms and held Dee very tight. "He'll be fine," she whispered. "He's a big strong dog and nothing frightens him." Pike looked at the two of them, and Bo opened her arms, welcomed him in, and hugged them both. Soon all three had fallen asleep, except that Pike snored too loudly, and Dee gave him a jab in the ribs with her elbow. He grunted, rolled over, and was silent. The next morning was misty and warm. They all knew that this heralded a long, hot day. "Let's go," called Dee. "I want to find Tank, and I want to see a fairy ring." Everybody knows that long, hot days are the best for seeing fairy rings, so the three quickly struck camp and pushed on into the forest. The floor was covered with last fall's leaves, and Pike, being Pike, insisted on shuffling through the leaves, making as much noise as he could, until a leaf got into his shoe and started to prick his foot. "You two go on, I'll catch you up," he called to them. Taking off his shoe, he bent over to remove the leaf. He felt hot breath on his neck, followed by a slobbery lick. "Tank!" he called. "Hello, boy, where have you been?" Tank simply continued to lick Pike and then nuzzled his pockets. "I don't have anything," Pike said mournfully, "but the girls aren't too far away. You must be starving. Come to think of it, so am I." The two ran off after the girls. Dee turned and let out a huge squeal of delight. "Tank! I thought you'd gone forever." She clung to him, and he rewarded her with the slobberiest kiss he'd ever given anyone. She got some food for him out of her backpack and stood guarding him as he wolfed it all down. "Can we have breakfast now, please?" said Pike. "I'm hungry. We have found Tank after all." "In a minute," said Bo. "I wonder where he spent the night." As if on cue, Tank then led them through the trees and out into a small clearing. There, right in the middle, lay Tank's blanket. Round the blanket were lots of milky white toadstools. "Oh my," said Dee, "we found it. A fairy ring." "You mean that Tank found it," said Bo and Pike, both at the same time. "Yes," said Dee. "Isn't he clever?" She threw her arms around the big dog and smiled very contentedly. "Such a good dog." They all agreed and hungrily set about preparing their breakfast. And the next story we'll talk a bit more about the fairy ring. Until later.